welcome the one professor who in my vision was always that what I thought EGS is about. He is the transdisciplinary person you can imagine. A painter who is a filmmaker, who is challenging filmmaking, asking for new cinema. The thinker who is challenging, or at least get angry when you call him a philosopher, because he always thinks he must be an academic philosopher. I've read all the books and studied. So he has all that, and he is still not to be determined, to be labeled. And how well he works, I had the pleasure to see 3 weeks ago in Amsterdam the famous Night Watch of Rembrandt was given over to him, the real painting, for I think 7 or 8 nights, only Friday nights.
3 months. 3 months.
3 months, okay, between 6 and 10, you could go there, and then Peter Greenaway started reading the Night Watch with light and sound, and it was like nothing you have seen before. How such a well-known painting, impressive in its own right, started to become very contemporary, like a more than a film. I think my feeling was that this is how you might see cinema, that every face in there is like a painting in a movie. So that the right of the image is not just to be in context, but in itself also something important. So it was unfortunately you will never able to see it, because for the next forever it's gone now. It wasn't even. So anyway, please welcome our founding professor Peter Greenaway.
Well, thank you, Wolfgang, for that adulatory prologue. I hope in some parts that some of it can be justified. Yes, indeed. What I'd like to do, I hope not to be too egocentric, but I need, I suppose, to be able only to speak from one authority, and that authority is me. What I'd like to talk about is 2 projects which we have made in Holland in the last 4 or 5 months. The 2 projects in some ways are, unless you're incredibly intellectually ingenious, totally separate. I'm sure, as always, you can forge connections between them. The first project is one that Wolfgang did not see. It still exists and will be there probably until October of this year. It's in the south of Holland at a place called Asperen. Asperen was always considered to be one of the frontier towns to the old boundaries between France and certainly the northern Netherlands. And around about the time of Napoleon, they built a series of fortresses which also acted as fortresses, if you like, not only against predominantly the French enemy, but fortresses against the enemy of water. As you know, most of Holland is beneath sea level. I live in a house in Amsterdam, whose foundations are 1.5 meters beneath sea level. If you go down into Schiphol Airport, Amsterdam's airport, it's 5 meters beneath sea level. They have, and I'm sure I'm telling you what you know, but it's worth reiterating, a huge reputation of being able to handle notions of defense against the sea. They've had this, of course, for nearly, I suppose, nearly over 1,000 years. Some of the communities, indeed, in the north of Holland, places like Groningen and Leeuwarden, actually started, I suppose, northern Dutch civilization literally by turning up every summer, because it was pointless going there in the winter, and pretty pointless going there in the spring and the autumn, because the tides were so high, and most of the land was, if not totally covered in water, extremely marshy. So in the early days, we're talking about, I suppose, 800 AD, they would go to the north of Holland with their cattle, because in the summer months, the sea receded sufficiently for very rich pastures to form very temporarily. Gradually, these particular peoples, of course they are basically what West Germans, whoever the West Germans were at that time, grew more and more confident until they started bringing their wives and their children. But in order to make settlements that would last during the whole of the year, they would literally grab the mud and the sand and make what are called terps. To begin with, they were only maybe, I don't know, metre and a half, just sufficient for the cattle not to drown. In fact, it is said the cattle became so used to these activities that the cattle in some strange way became more conversant with the tides and the weather and the winds than men. And so the cattle would gather together when they anticipated the tides were coming in on the highest possible place they could, which is only about a metre and a half above sea level, and stand and wait. And the water would come up and up and up and up and up. They would reach about here, and all the cattle would have their noses in the air, but they would stand patiently because they knew the water would go down again. When it did, they'd go back to grazing. Apparently the sophistication of these animals was so amazing that they could actually anticipate extra high tides, and they would leave the marshes completely and go into the towns and hang around the towns while the tide was up. When the tide went back, there were stories that when, I don't know, some sort of foot and mouth disease overtook all these cattle and wiped them all out, that when the German farmers introduced new cattle, these new cattle, of course, didn't have the folk memory of this, and they all perished. They would stand there and the tide would go on and on, and they were all dead. Anecdotal information, but it shows the edge, I suppose, of the necessity to be able to have some sort of control over the notion of water. We're all aware of global warming, the warming of the seas, ice caps melting, etc. And the Dutch were deeply disturbed by the recent events in New Orleans. The convergence of estuarine phenomenon is very much part of the Dutch North Sea coast. And so there's a sensation all over again that they're going to have to do something very serious. Al Gore recently published in America a so-called secret report persuading American businessmen not to invest in Holland in the next 25 years because they'd be wasting their money because the country's going to be flooded. There's every evidence, if you examine the patterns of movement of water. The Dutch have always thought that the UK, and especially, I suppose, Wales, which is mountainous, and Ireland, which is fairly mountainous, are the buffer against most of the westerly weather. But again, meteorologists are suggesting the whole sea systems are moving south. So the sea now will not simply break up against the coast of Ireland and Wales, but it'll come around the bottom of the Bristol Channel and will attack the French, Belgian, and Dutch coast from around the corner as it seems. And the best case scenario, and this is the best case scenario, they reckon that at least 2/3 of Amsterdam is going to disappear by the year 2035. The predictions are quite dire. You know, when people keep shouting prophecies like that, either you deliberately turn a blind ear, or you really do something about it. And most of Holland seems to be divided. But that's, of course, the best case scenario, and the chances are that probably they even put out warnings a couple of weeks ago. There was comparatively clement weather, thank God, but the moon was full and the tides were extremely high. So they're anticipating again at the vernal equinox, what's that, 21st, 22nd of March next year, 2007, again the tides are going to be high. There is a feeling that massive tides occur in north corner of Europe probably about once every 30 years. They're anticipating those coming up very soon. And then even extra massive tides are anticipated every 100 years. And you might know that the last big tides in northern Europe were around about 1951, 52, 53, when there was enormous disaster, not only on the English coast, but all up the Dutch coast too. I'm giving you all this background because it's integral about where my intervention comes in. There is a feeling too, which I think is probably more a metaphor than reality, that the Dutch are so good at handling the water systems that the country is only about 350 miles long, north to south. But when a housewife turns the tap on in the far, far north, 350 miles further south, the water level just slightly fluctuates. So their ability to handle water across the whole length and breadth of the country is extraordinary.